Good morning, everyone. Today, excited to be joined by Mike. Mike's got one of the more successful entrepreneurs that we've had on the show, and has a unique perspective to be able to provide. And so, excited to kind of hear from him this morning. So, Mike, without any further ado, would love for you to just introduce yourself a little bit to the audience.
Sure, Liam. Thanks so much for having me today. Yeah, Mike Malatesta. I'm an entrepreneur. I became an entrepreneur when I was 26 after I was fired from a job that yeah, I thought maybe one day I had a chance to become the CEO of the company, and instead of that path, I got the path of we don't need your services any longer. And so um, about 6 months later, and I had not thought about being an entrepreneur prior to being fired. Maybe I started, I had this thing when I was 4 years old, Liam, when I was sitting on the curb in front of my parents' house, and we lived across the street from a construction company, and I would watch the trucks come in, and I just thought this was the coolest thing ever. And I thought to myself, I'm going to make a living, with trucks, but I had no idea what that meant, of course. And I had no idea what an entrepreneur was or even a business. And then I forgot about all that stuff. I went to school and got out of college, and everybody that I was around was like, I'm either going to med school, become a lawyer, or I'm going to get a job. And I didn't want any more school. I was done with traditional school. So I went and got a job, and I made my career in the waste industry. That's where I started, and got into that by driving a garbage truck when I was in college. Sort of this love of trucks got me into the garbage industry. And then I thought, wow, this is a really cool industry. And so um, got hired by a big company. And as I mentioned, I got fired about 5 years later and became an entrepreneur in a bootstrap way with a partner who I had worked with for a short period of time before I got fired. And we, we were very, very fortunate, although it was not an easy path. We were able to create a company that grew consistently, and 22 years later, I sold that business um, to a publicly traded competitor. And then the next time, 3 years after that, I did it differently. I started another waste business, but this time I started it with a private equity backed sponsor. And that was very intentional because I said to myself, well, if I'm going to do this again, um, I think I have what I need to accelerate the growth and get something going faster. And bringing on this partner, which is a fantastic fit, allowed us to do that. And we ended up building a business and then selling it 3 years later. So just recently. So that's sort of a thumbnail of my entrepreneurial career.
It sounds like you had this very cathartic, life-changing moment of being fired that worked out for the best, and sent you down this journey that you're obviously very engaged in, seem very fulfilled in. How did you then take that opportunity to explore something else, the love of trucks, and kind of get into the waste business? I imagine the waste business is pretty capital intensive. And so for someone who's 26 coming out of, the corporate world doing their own thing, how did those bricks fall into place for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And you're right. I grew up. My early career was in the trash business, and I really loved that business. But as I looked around after I was fired, and it did turn out to be cathartic, by the way, but it certainly didn't feel cathartic, when it happened. I looked around and I said, I don't think we can compete. I don't think I can compete in the trash business where I was in Wisconsin, because it was really dominated by all the big players, and there was I just didn't see a differentiation. And so instead of going into the trash business, we ended up going into the wastewater business. So working with factories primarily who had contaminated wastewater as a part of their process, and figuring out a way to provide them the service to truck that away and recycle and clean up the water. So we sort of looked for a niche that was not as capital intensive, and certainly not as red ocean, as you might call the competitive environment on the trash side. And that was the decision we ended up making, and that was turned out to be a good one, for us, because we there in that industry it was still it was not mature like trash. It was still developing. There were some, a lot of incumbents, but they were small, sort of family businesses. There was an opportunity to professionalize. There was an opportunity to um, uh, be really demonstrate a positive differentiation. There was just an opportunity to outwork the people that were in the business at the time. And while there was still a lot of capital compared to some businesses, it was way less than it would have been to replicate something in the trash business.
Fascinating. All about finding the niche, it sounds like. And completely hear you on never feels good when you get fired, right?
No.
To get to the point where you've got the perspective where, it sent you on a different path in life that ended up being very successful, right, is very powerful, right? And the openness that you're able to talk about it now and, not harbor resentment for it, right? And
that's waste of time. I did that for a long time, or a while at least, but total waste of time. I mean, the past is the past, and how I feel about it doesn't change it. So I need to focus on the future. And I was very fortunate. I will say too that my partner, Butch, he had been a farmer all his life, and I like to say that the seed that was planted in me when I was a 4-year-old sitting on that curb was something that he figured out a way to germinate. He had the right water, the right fertilizer, the right whatever to germinate that, give me the confidence. And then, of course, his support was instrumental in getting it off the ground and making it into something.
That's great. And that you had that partner and that, confidant along the way, a teacher, right?
For sure.
So as that business began to grow, right, and, the capital requirements, were less, and you weren't worried about, covering overhead or paying yourself or putting, roof over your head, and you had profitability coming in. What did you start, like, what was your strategic framework in terms of your thoughts of where you started to put that capital?
Well, I would say that for the first 10 or 12 years, so long time, I was 100% all in on the business. Like, it came first, and all of my, I didn't consider myself to be building wealth at the time. I just considered myself to be doing what was necessary in order for the business to keep growing. But I had we had two other partners, and Larry Lyons was sort of the lead on those. And Larry was very smart about things. And he, we engineered a couple of recapitalizations of our own, company during this time. So we were freeing up, basically lending money to ourselves, and then freeing up an ability to take it out and do other things with it, because, he was, just he was a good advisor. Like, you need to start divesting. You need to start spreading stuff around a little bit more, because you can't have what we have in this business is always going to be the majority of what we have. But if it's everything that we have, and who knows what happens, we don't want to be in that situation. So my very first first I was buying stocks. I was Jim Cramer was a guy that I was following like religiously back in the .com days. And he probably still does. I don't know. He had this thing where he would tell you what he was going to buy, and you could buy out in front of him. And I was doing all of that. And then I was like, what am I doing? Because it was taking so much attention away from my business, because I was always like, oh, Jim Cramer sent an email. What do I, have to do? So I did that for a while. That kind of got my foot sort of in the water a little bit. And of course I was doing my 401k and all the smart stuff you should be doing. And then my first sort of alternative investment was, I found there was a private equity firm in Milwaukee that was it was a fundless fund. And so what that means is, they basically raise money on a deal by deal basis uh, instead of creating a fund. And for an investor, like an entrepreneur who may not have the wherewithal to say put $250,000 into a fund and commit to that sort of thing, it was a great way to say, hey, I can invest $25,000 alongside the rest of the investment pool in this particular deal. And that's what I did. So I did a few of those. It was a modest investment, but significant. Modest in terms of the shares you got in the company, but significant for me, and just a great way to start exploring, one, the understanding the private equity world, and two, having a front seat to what other businesses are like, how they run, what's their profitability like, what are their challenges, and that kind of thing. So that was how I first got into alternative investing.
You talked about your advisor, right?
Yeah.
That came along and talked about some of this, divestiture, not having all the eggs in one basket. Sounds like that was, 10, 12 years down the line when that, started to take hold. Do you feel like if you got that advice earlier, it would have changed how you allocated some of that capital, or was that capital integral to the growth that the company had to be able to get it to that place to be able to allow you to do it, right?
Yeah.
Kind of a chicken and the egg, right? Trying to understand that piece.
I think it may have, Liam, but um, I try not to do a lot of looking back on something. It says, well, if I had known something earlier, would have, because the reality was I didn't know earlier. And I feel like, early on, and early on can be, whatever number of years it is, but early on for us, I think, being all in on the business was really all I had the bandwidth to do. And not just financially, but just attention wise as well. So maybe I would recommend considering it earlier, but I would be careful about um, potentially compromising the growth of your number one asset, which is your business, in order to diversify significantly, at least, really early, because you just might need that capital to do something that I don't think you're ever going to make the return on an alternative investment that you're going to make on yourself, I guess is my way of saying it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Most powerful investment's always in yourself, right?
Number one.
Always, right? So as you were, it sounds like lots of time, energy, financial resources put into that growth, that first 10 to 12 years. How did you balance that with, I believe you had a family at the time, wife had moved up, right? Milwaukee with you, Wisconsin, sorry,
Right.
right? How did you balance some of that, right? And I'm assuming there's a possibility kids came along the way during that time, right? And so a lot of things to juggle, right? When you're trying to bet on yourself,
Right.
increase that asset, right? How do you get those people who are most important to you around and aligned on that vision? So it's not creating angst, right? But that it's creating synergies to move forward.
Yeah, I could tell you all kinds of things that I believe now, but I will tell you, at the time, it was really because my wife believed in what we were doing, and she was willing to take on much bigger burden when it came to the family and to the kids than she probably deserved to need to take on. Because even though I wasn't one of these people, fortunately I didn't have a business where I was gone, for weeks at a time, or traveling all over the world or anything. The ability to be present, with the family was definitely, even if I was there, was definitely a challenge, mostly because of the way I set my life up to run, with regard to the company. So I was one of those people who um, kind of felt like everything was that I was responsible for everything, and I needed to touch everything, and everything needed to be run by me, and all of those things that are probably not the healthiest way to run a business. And as a result of that, um, even when I was available and around, I wasn't, I wasn't all there a lot of the time. And so, um, if I hadn't had a partner like Jamie it probably would have been different, because that's not something that everybody would be okay with, nor should they be, necessarily okay with that. So if I had to, and again, I'm not big on going back and say if I had to do things again, but I know now that the most important thing that I can do as a leader in a business or as an entrepreneur is do what's needed for the business and nothing else. What I'm uniquely capable and have the talent for doing that moves the needle the most in the business. And if I can do that, or if any entrepreneur can do that, you're going to free up a ton of time to be more present or do more things, or take care of yourself, or do all those other things that in the long term are, super, super, super important. I just didn't know that, or if I knew it, I just didn't do it until, a lot later. So I think I did okay. I'm not, but I definitely, the ability to be present was something that I, struggled with, because I designed a system. That's one thing I want to make sure the world doesn't happen to you, as an entrepreneur, for example. You design a system and you get what you design typically. And I designed a system that required me to be this, a person who didn't have a lot of presence for other things. I could have designed something different, and I definitely designed things differently now. So that'd be something I would think about, no matter what stage you are in your journey.
So as you talk about moving from the system where you had a lot of control, you were likely involved in everything, to moving to a system where you're focused on just that thing that's going to add the most value. How did you go through, what was the process you went through to identify what that one thing is, that where you would add the most value, to let go of all the other things?
Yeah, I would love to tell you that I had an epiphany one day and I was like, I know exactly what to do. But the reality for me was, about 10 years into the business, my partner Butch, who I talked about, passed away because he was badly burned in a fire at one of our plants, and 3 days later he died. And that was something that that was sort of the last that I had been in this grind phase for so long, up to that point. That sort of broke the back, and I was literally a broken person after that for a couple of years, and I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was blaming other people, and I was unhappy with where I was, and I didn't know where to go, Liam, and but I wasn't willing to accept the responsibility for where I was, as I had talked about earlier. And that awareness, that self-awareness for me recognizing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And if I was exactly where I was supposed to be, if I had designed that system to get there, couldn't I design a system to get me where I want to be, out of here, and where I want to be? And having that realization, and then coupled with a program that I got into called the Strategic Coach, which is an entrepreneurial training program that's exceptional. Having that realization, and then getting some of the tools that they provided, like the concept of owning my future, for example, started to show me the light. And then, in my book, I talk about how I had to get selfish to get unstuck. And what really ended up happening after I had those couple of things come together is I thought for all this time before I was broke that I was and I treated the business. I thought the business needed me for everything, and I treated it like it was a baby, like it still needed me for every one of its needs. And the fact was, it was, a teen or, a young adult, and I was still treating it like a baby. And I was doing that, I think, because I didn't want to face the fact that I had to grow as a leader. I had to know what I wanted in order to continue to be valuable to the business. And instead I mistake, having my hands in everything for being valuable. Um, so I needed to get selfish. And what I mean by that is I really needed time to think about what I actually wanted my future to be and get very specific about it. And then once I was able to do that, it was so liberating because I was able to go back to my team, and I was actually able to, one, create a better team, because I knew kind of the kind of help that I needed in order for me to get where I wanted to go. But I could also give them the tools and the vision and everything they needed to do the job that they were able to do already. I just wasn't letting them do it. So I'd say the combination of all those things is what really helped me.
Makes sense. And I'm nodding my head in agreement over here because I'm going through a lot of that process myself.
Okay.
And I think people sometimes underestimate how difficult it is, that transition, right? In terms of the work required and the personal change, right? Again, you
Yeah.
own everything, you set the structure, right? But there's an acknowledgement that you have to make to yourself that, well, shit, I'm not doing it right. And something I did before, I'm not doing as well as I should be, right? Or I've got to make changes.
Yeah.
And that can be very difficult.
Yeah. I've come to call it an ownership mentality. So you've got ownership, of course, but ownership means, along the way, along the journey, there are going to be shifts that are required. And some of them are going to be, voluntary shifts that you make because they're obvious to you. And the others, the more challenging ones, are going to be those shifts that need to be made, but you don't see them. The blind spot shifts, the shifts that you may not believe in, but someone is, encouraging you to make them. The kind that you have to be drugged, in order to make. And I don't mean drugged, but physically dragged, I guess is a better way to put it. So yeah, I think that shift mentality is a very, if you're willing to give into that, you can make a lot of progress that you wouldn't be able to make if you weren't, in my opinion.
Um, Kind of reverting back to the topic we were talking about, where you were talking about investing in your first alternatives.
Yeah.
As we fast forward to where you are today, obviously you've had two successful exits. Um, what is your kind of structure, right, in terms of how you're allocating funds today, and where you're picking to invest and how you think about divesting, right, or balancing kind of your portfolio for the long run?
So I take, well, as I mentioned, number one is me. So I'm always looking for another opportunity that I can get into, like the ones that I described that can be largely influenced by me. But outside of that, I mean, my split up is essentially 80% of what I have is in what I consider to be solid income generating or growth oriented, securities or physical assets. So whether that's, home or stocks or, whatever, that kind of thing. And then 20% is for what I consider alternative investments, but more specifically, my mission is to help create successful entrepreneurs. So I want to back early stage entrepreneurs. I want to back, mid-stage entrepreneurs. I want to back recapitalizations of, for a new management team in an existing business, for example. I want to help create, have a hand in creating the next generation of successful entrepreneurs because they need it, they deserve it, and they may just, change the world or certainly make lives easier and better. And I want to have a hand in helping 1,000 entrepreneurs create businesses that are worth over $20 million each. And then I want to help them influence and encourage 10 other people that they know to do the same thing. And I feel like um, if if I come anywhere close to achieving that goal, Liam, the impact that I can say I had a small part in on the world is going to be, you know, phenomenal. So I feel like entrepreneurs owe it to the future entrepreneurs to help them. And I know it's scary, and a lot of people that I know, entrepreneurs that I know, don't want to invest in early stage companies because of the risk and all that. And I can appreciate that. I just don't agree with it. I mean, I think they owe it to the future. And I also, like, when I told you I didn't want to go to school anymore, when I was getting out of college, the investing I do in these companies is like school for me. So not only am I supporting these entrepreneurs, but I am learning so much about, whether it's tech or whether it's, biotech, whatever it is, things that would never ever come, across my face where I live in Wisconsin doing my day-to-day thing. I have, a front seat, and I feel like I'm living in the future by helping these people. And I don't know, that just really, I don't know what else I could be doing that provides more value than that.
Do you look at, from an investor standpoint, they returned differently on that 20%? Because it sounds like it ties into mission, right? It ties into, obviously you're getting education and investing in yourself along the way, right? And you're also helping the company, but you also want a return, right? So I imagine that there's these trade-offs that present themselves from time to time where, something might be pulling at your heartstrings, but not, have the best return. Short term, maybe it's a, really long-term play. Like, how do you balance that in your mind in terms of, what your expectations are from an investment standpoint?
Well, I would say that I really don't think about it that much, because in any one of these investments, or in almost all of them, I am following someone else. So someone that I trust is leading this. So they're doing the due diligence. They're telling me why they think this is a good opportunity. And I'm just agreeing or not agreeing and going along, for the ride. And because I'm fortunate, and a lot of people would be fortunate in the same way to, have resources that if if a lot of these don't work out, I still feel like I got something for my money, help the entrepreneur, got the education. So maybe I don't get a huge return, but I also know, well, I can't say I know because it's not a fact, but I also feel like there are going to be I'm going to be able to look back in years and say, you know what, I was an early investor in, you name it. And that's going to take care of all the rest of them, or a few of those are going to take care of all the rest of them. And so for me, I don't give it much more thought than that, because if I thought about every one as if I could lose by doing it, I would never do any of them.
Well, and that's probably why it's balanced, right? It's a 20% of the portfolio, right? Correct. And it's there's a lot of ulterior components that factor into providing you value other than the return.
Yes, correct.
Which makes sense. When you were talking about how you met that first PE firm, that was a non-fund investment opportunity, right? For those listeners who are interested in potentially, chasing some of those opportunities, where do you suggest they start in trying to identify, some of those companies that are open to something like that?
So there is there's an organization called ACG, and I don't remember what I know growth is the G, but ACG is basically a trade association that pretty much all the private equity firms belong to.
And Association for Corporate Growth.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I would suggest looking there, finding private equity firms that are in your area, something local where you can actually meet them, and then just look up look them up and see if they're fund or fundless. And if they are a fund, you want to see what their minimums are, because I mentioned $250,000. Some you can probably get into for less than that. So that's the first place I would start. And then I would call them and I would connect with them on LinkedIn and I would ask them questions. And, what I found in that world is, they're looking for investors, but they're also looking to build their contact network, and they're always interested in talking to people who are interested in what they're doing.
So it's a approach from a network/sales perspective to build obviously your engagement with them, and obviously creates opportunity for yourself and for them along the way.
Yeah. I mean, that you take an interest in that. Well, like the people that I first started with, I knew one of the partners a little, meaning he was an acquaintance. Like I'd met him and I just reached out, sent an email like, "Hey, I'm interested." They didn't contact me or anything. And then we sat down and talked, and that's how I got involved. And that's the way most of the world works, right? If you take the initiative.
Yep.
But I think that's probably a good way to do it.
Excellent. As we're wrapping up here, Mike, any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience in terms of piece of advice or stories or nuggets of wisdom?
Well, for me, becoming an entrepreneur is a really, really big decision, and probably the best decision that you can make if you've got the mind and the stomach and the whatever else you need for it. But I would say I encourage all entrepreneurs to go big. So even if you want to, start a small company, that's fine. Make it a great small company and then make it big with everything that you've learned and every capability that you've come across and everything you're doing well. Just go big with it, because your impact on people, on the world, on your own, financial success, I think can be magnified for many entrepreneurs, and they just don't. Going big is easier than staying small. Let me just put it that way. Simple as that, in my opinion. And I want to help people do that.
What's the best way for the audience to connect back with you, right? Obviously, your mission is aligned with helping a lot of the listeners, right? And so
Sure.
How do they connect back into you?
Well, a great way to connect and see what I'm doing is to listen to my podcast, which is called How Did It Happen. You can get that on any of the podcast apps. I share, I dig deep into stories of success on that podcast, where and my goal is to inspire and activate greatness in everyone. So that's a great place. You can buy my book, which is available now on Amazon. It's called Owner Shift: How Getting Selfish Got Me Unstuck. And you can visit my website, as Liam did, www.mikemalatesta, MALATESTA.com, or connect with me on LinkedIn, Mike Malatesta. You'll find me there.
Really appreciate the time and the perspective today, Mike. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me on, Liam. This has been great.